Okay, I've unmuted myself. Good afternoon, everybody. And as Swati said, I'm Greg Kaur, the Director of the Monitoring State Improvement Planning Division in the Office of Special Education Programs. I want to welcome everybody to our September TA call. Our topic today will be family involvement and parent involvement, addressing representative in the SPP APR. And I think this is a topic that both Part B and Part C staff will find of equal interest. Before we get started with today's presentation, I want to make sure that you're all aware of the August 24th letter that OSEP sent to state and local partners, reiterating our commitment to ensuring children with disabilities and their families have successful early intervention and educational experiences in the 21-22 school year. As part of the department's return to school roadmap, OSERS released Child Find under Part B of the IDEA on August 24th. This guidance document is the first of a series of guidance documents that we will release in the coming weeks and months, which focus on school reopening efforts and are intended to support the full implementation of IDEA requirements by state education agencies, local school districts, lead agencies for Part C, and early intervention services providers. The Return to School Roadmap IDEA guidance documents are also intended to provide useful information to parents of infants, toddlers, and children with disabilities. The documents will focus on those topics most closely related to ensuring that, regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic or the mode of instruction or service delivery, that children with disabilities will receive FAPE and that infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families will receive high-quality early intervention services. So now to today's presentation, family involvement and parent involvement. OSEP's Jennifer Miley will lead off. Jennifer is a veteran Part C state lead here in OSEP who has for a number of years focused on family and parent involvement and engagement. After Jennifer, we will hear two guest speakers, which I'll go ahead and introduce now before we get started. First, we'll be hearing from Thomas McGee, MSW. He's a TA specialist with ECTA, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, with the Trohannes Technical Assistance Projects. Thomas has more than 27 years experience working with organizations that serve children and families in need. He's worked in a variety of settings, providing direct services, developing employees, managing programs, leading agencies, and evaluating programs. Prior to joining ECTA, he served as the director of a local Part C program in North Carolina, where he was involved in many local and state initiatives, including state systemic improvement plan related activities, family engagement, family focus groups, and family outcomes. Thomas has served for 19 years on the North Carolina Smart Start Board of Directors in various roles. Presently, Thomas is the Family Outcomes Topic Lead and has lead roles with several related work groups. He also serves on accountability and quality improvement and transition topic teams, and has recently allocated some additional time to work with DAISY, providing some technical assistance for that organization. So Thomas has quite a bit of information that we're looking forward to him sharing with us. After Thomas's presentation, our final speaker will be Carolyn Hayer. Carolyn has been working in the field of advocacy for over 30 years. She's currently the Senior Program Director of the National and Regional Projects at SPAN Parent Advocacy Center in New Jersey. I understand she's digging out from some of the damage from Hurricane Ida there in New Jersey. As director of the Center for the Parent Information and Resources, Carolyn and her team work to provide information and products to build capacity of the approximately 100 parent centers across the country that serve and assist families of and youth with disabilities. In Carolyn's various roles at SPAN, she's conducted presentations at the local, state, and national levels on topics related to health and education advocacy, family professional partnerships, and family and youth leadership development. She previously served as co-director of multiple projects supporting parent centers, addressing issues including reaching and supporting underserved families, nonprofit management, and building capacity to reach, serve, and grow leadership skills of diverse youth and young adults with disabilities as they transition to adulthood. So Thomas and Carolyn have quite a bit to share today, and I won't take up any more time, but turn our presentation over to Jennifer. One thing I did want to mention, that Angela Tanner-Dean, one of our Associate Division Directors, will be personing the chat and may occasionally answer a question. We will have some time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So now, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thanks for the really warm welcome. I like the fact that you mentioned I'm a veteran. So that works. Hopefully I will live up to that strong introduction today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. It's been a long time since I've been in this position. And there's a little of excitement and a little of anxiety all mixed up into one. But I'm really excited to be with you, as well as to be in the company of Thomas and Carolyn. And I hope that you guys will really enjoy this presentation today. We've worked really hard to put together a really meaningful presentation that is going to address the importance of representativeness and race and ethnicity in the annual APR process. So let's get started. And one of the things I wanted to do is to frame our discussion today by including this particular slide from our Secretary, Miguel Cardona. And we think it's really relevant to what we're all going through right now, as well as the topic that we're going to share today. So let's get started. Our presentation today, as I said a few seconds ago, is going to focus on the importance of representativeness in race and ethnicity, in the annual SPP APR report, specifically B8, parent involvement, and C4, family involvement. And a disclaimer, I am very much a Part C state lead. I am very entrenched in the language and the wonderful aspects of Part C. So if you hear me slipping back and forth, please extend some grace, as Christine typically says. We all know the value of parent involvement in the lives of children with disabilities. Research constantly tells us that when parents are involved in their education, that the results and outcomes are always great. They're stellar. They have a better trajectory of learning and education. And so we could say the same thing about the involvement of parents in the family survey process, which is why we're here today, to talk extensively about the importance of parent participation in the family survey process. And so I noted a few things that I want to share with you today regarding the value of parent participation process, the parent participation in the family survey process. One, the family survey process is a very formal way to receive input from the families. The states have an opportunity to learn if families feel supported by the schools and early intervention programs that children attend. It's also an opportunity to learn if your schools and programs are working to engage and involve parents throughout their time with early intervention or special education services. It's also an opportunity through the family survey process to determine if you are having the impact that your survey is geared towards. If families feel connected, if they feel involved, if they feel as though you're meeting the needs of their children and the children are growing and learning to their optimal best. And finally, an additional value is the data that you receive from the family survey and the fact that you can use that data to evaluate, analyze, and determine if you're meeting the goals that are required in B8 and C4, and whether or not you are actually reaching all of the children and families with disabilities in your program, which is a really very important requirement of B8 and C4. and more importantly, the topic of discussion is representativeness, the representativeness of the family survey process. And we all know, because you guys are required to report each year on the representativeness of your data, whether the children are receiving the services that they are required to receive. And for B8 and for C4, historically, the data has indicated that Black, Latino, and Native American families are typically underrepresented. They're actually the most underrepresented. And there is historical data to reflect that. And that data is consistent with FFY 2019 data. Black, Latino, and Native American families remain underrepresented in B8 and C4 for FFY 2019. Throughout the pandemic, we have been talking with a lot of families and stakeholders and states regarding the impact that Swati, you can keep it on the first slide. I'm almost finished. You keep it on the first slide with the Secretary's comment. Yes, thanks. So throughout the pandemic, we have been working with states and hearing from states, particularly in our monthly calls, regarding how the pandemic has impacted many children and families with disabilities, practically all of them. And a lot of the information that we've been hearing is, quite sad and overwhelming. And so one of the things the federal government and the Department of Education has done is issue funding to help support states, decrease the disparities that the pandemic has caused. Well, the money is available for all states. The money has been available for all states. And we have been hearing in our monthly calls how states have been using the CARES Act funding, ESSER, the ARP funds. And many states have reported using those funds directly to support their family engagement efforts, as well as to address the representativeness that they may be challenged with. And some of the ideas or some of the information states have been sharing related to their use of these funds is new and improved data systems, increased child find efforts, particularly in those areas that are underserved, underrepresented in their APR. Staffing, of course, we know that there's a staffing shortage, an epidemic actually across the country, professional development, and even transportation. So we're really happy to hear. I was really happy to learn while I was doing my research on this particular presentation that a number of states reported in the FFY 2019 APR that they are directly using some of their funds to address family surveys and to address representativeness. So that's really exciting. So next slide, Swati. Now we're going to look at some trend data associated with Part B. And let me remind you very briefly of the measurement for B8. The number of respondent parents who report schools facilitated parent involvement as a means of improving services and results for children with disabilities divided by the total number of respondents of parents with disabilities. And so as you see from this trend data from 3 years, there's very little variations in the data from 42% in 2017 to 55%, and then finally to 43% in 2019. So it's really important to note that states were not required to analyze race and ethnicity in the FFY 2019 APR. 2 states also set their own thresholds, and they have their own measurements, unique measurements for calculating what they deem as representative in their APR. And third, the family survey process varies very broadly across states for both B and C. As you know, some states sample, some states census. Other states have very few questions. When I was reading one of the APRs, one state decreased their family survey questions down to 6 Another state may have 30 to 40 questions. I had one state that at one point had like 80 questions. So there were a number of revisions made during the FFY 2019 APR process. And although the pandemic was only a small portion of that reporting period, it still had a major impact for some of those states. So now let's look at the trend data for C4, family involvement. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you, Swati. Okay, so this is a very interesting one because for part C, you can actually see the trajectory is actually moving up slightly. But basically, there is very little, it has been very stable, very little movement within this data. And this is one of the, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the indicator analysis, the annual indicator analysis that ECTA does for part C and SIPR does for part B. And their indicator analysis confirmed that the trend data for both B8 and C4 over years remains very, very stable. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at within OSEP is trying to determine, why this happens. What can we do about it? Are there alternatives to parent engagement, family involvement? Are surveys the best way to gather input? How often are sampling plans reviewed? Things like that. So this is really exciting work and I'm happy to be a part of it. But I do want to add for part C, my love is that the measurement, the number of respondent families participating in part C who report that early intervention services help their family know their rights. And then the second outcome is early intervention services have helped their family effectively communicate their children's needs. And the outcome C is early intervention services have helped the family help their children develop and grow and learn. And so of course that's divided by 100 and expressed in a percent. And so these are really, really very important goals for Part C children and families. And simply because the average age of entry for children in Part C is typically between 16 and 18 months. So that leaves states with a very short time to work with the families. It really doesn't allow for very many missteps because as we know, early intervention works. It changes the course of a child's life and family. And it really is, an important, a really critical service that, they need. And we're happy to be a part of it. And so I wanted to add that time, inclusion, equity, and meaningful family engagement is really critical, not only for Part C, but also for Part B. But because our babies are coming in, at a later stage, sometimes, we really want to be on the ball when they enter the program. I do have a question. I would like a little interaction in the chat. And I have a question I'm going to ask, and if you would answer yes or no, do you think the pandemic had an impact on your APR data? Or did the pandemic have an impact on your family survey data or representative data? And I have some answers to that. So feel free to put your responses in the chat or the Q&A. I don't want to mess things up. So while the pandemic, this was really interesting as I was reading the APRs, while the pandemic only represented a small amount of that reporting period, quite a number of states reported the impact on B8 and C4. In addition, some states specifically reported that the pandemic had a massive impact on their family survey data, and it even derailed some of their efforts to meet the representativeness requirement. I found that really, really outstanding. That was really a great data dive. So I know that you're putting your responses in the chat. So I have a cheat sheet. Next slide, Swati, please. And you may see some of your responses here, because this is all of this data is taken directly from the FFY 2019 APRs. And I'll give you a moment to just read it. So as a result of the pandemic, a number of states reported that they had to shift quite a number of processes, of course, due to COVID. And many of those processes, impacted their B8 and C4 data. And these are the ones that were probably more common among all of the APRs. So states also mentioned some promising practices that came out of this shift in processes that they had to do, that they had to make because of the pandemic. And one of the more popular ones that came up pretty often in the APR was the hybrid approach to early intervention services and special education services. So for example, some states reported that rather than not have services at all, not, issue services at all, administer services at all, they developed a hybrid approach. I had extensive conversations with a couple of my states regarding what that looked like. So basically, a lot of parents surprisingly felt as though they like the opportunity to not only have in-person services, but also the opportunity to have virtual services, particularly when we were in the midst of the pandemic and things were really quite scary. One of the things that I found really striking is the number of states that actually administer face-to-face surveys face-to-face. And they spoke extensively in the APRs regarding the impact of that loss of face-to-face contact had on the family survey process and the data and the staff and the families. And I found that really heartwarming, because you could tell by some of the descriptions in many of these APRs that your staff and your programs and your districts are really engaged in trying to solicit input from families. And the fact that they had to resort to other methods such as online links, things like that, they really they were really at a loss for that personal contact with families. So that was really heartwarming. And we look forward to the day when all of that can happen again. One of the other things that I found extraordinary, and I was really happy to see, is when states made that pivot, or when they had to change processes in terms of survey distribution, they used text message as the medium to get that survey to families. Quite a number of states actually reported on that. And it was really, really wonderful to see that, nothing stopped. We're just gonna find a way around these barriers. We're gonna get to these families. We're gonna make sure we receive their input, and we're gonna carry on in the best way. And so text message was extremely popular. Everybody has a cell phone. So I thought that was excellent. So let's look more. I've talked about, text message and hybrid approach. Let's look at some more data that is actually from the 2019 APRs to describe some of their promising practices and improvement strategies that states reported. Next slide, Swati. Thank you. And I'm pretty sure I'm probably forgetting to say next slide. Next, thank you. Thank you, Swati. So as I was doing my research and looking at Part B and Part C states to determine, what type of shifts they were making and, what this may look like for the future. The promising practices and the improvement strategies generally fell into 4 categories. And I want to share some of them with you. I love the regulations. I love the Part C regulations. I love monitoring. I love, as I said, everything about Part C. And I was really, really happy to read and fascinated by the formal systems of accountability and how states are really, really doing their due diligence to examine their data, particularly when it's not representative. And so one of the things that quite a number of states talked about in terms of formal systems of accountability was targeted TA with corrective action plans. And a lot of that targeted TA was targeted to those districts or programs or early intervention programs whose data was not representative. And so not only were they requiring them to look at the full system of why, but they were also partnering up with other districts or LEAs or EIP programs who actually had data that was representative. And so it was like a partnership. Well, tell me what you did to, make sure that Black, Latino, and Native American families are receiving services. So what happened, So I found that really interesting that they were actually, many states were actually making this a very formal process and not just, well, it's just a family survey. If we hear from them, we do. If we don't. So that is, the fact that it's very serious is really heartwarming. As I said, specific drill down of data. A couple of states talked about a self-assessment. And so that self-assessment involved looking at their entire family engagement system from top to bottom and going through that checklist of that, or that assessment in alignment with the regulations to ensure that they're meeting all of the goals and the requirements. And that is major. And you guys may hear, these ideas are taken exactly from the APR. I have a note here. Let's see. Specific staff such as family service coordinators and parent representatives. Quite a number of states talked about that. Having parent representatives to work with the family survey process. Technology, I mentioned text messages, increased online distribution of the survey, targeted, quite a number, this was very popular as well, targeted visually appealing infographics, fact sheets, public awareness materials that is culturally competent and diverse and specific to those populations that are not being served. So that's really major. Multiple distribution of links and surveys, and of course, many reminders. Key collaborations, this was very consistent across quite a number of the states. Collaborations with ECTA, DAISY, IDC, and I shared with Carolyn on the call last week that many Part B programs reported collaborations with parent centers, and I was really, really happy to see that. Of course, you guys know many private contractors.
I'm reminding you, exercise.
I'm sorry about that. That's Alexa reminding me to exercise. Oh gosh.
I'm reminding you, exercise.
Okay, got it. So yeah, the key collaborations are the Family Outcomes Community of Practice, the TA cohort on equity, universities, and one state mentioned Following Baby Back Home. And I thought this was really wonderful and unique. They follow high-risk infants from their discharge from the NICU throughout their early intervention years. Annual Family Engagement Summit. I sat in on one of those summits last month and it was excellent. And survey revisions. One state submitted a sampling plan. They revised their sampling plan. Other states are revisiting their sampling plan with their ICC. Parent weigh in on safe survey questions. That's extremely important. Increased language lines, newer revised sampling plans, and lots of input from your ICC. I think almost every single state, was really, really very vocal about how they engage their ICC in the family survey process. Next slide, please. So as I'm nearing the end of my presentation, I just wanted, to add a few reminders. We all know I'm preaching to the choir why representation matters. These are not just words on the screen. We are talking about children and families with disabilities who really need us and who really need all of us to act on their behalf. And I know that I am in a loving group of people who advocate for this on a daily basis, not only within MSEP, but also with the states that we all work with. One of the things that, I'm really kind of passionate about in my states, is parents' rights. And so, one of the questions I have is, one of the statements I have is that parent engagement is related to parents' rights. And sometimes we don't often look at that way, but it really is. It's a big part of it. And so I have a couple of questions for you to consider. In your explanation of parents' rights to families, is it connected to the family survey process? Is it like at the beginning? Is it your initial contact with families? Are you telling them about how this survey is going to not only help their children and help your program get better, but are you connecting it to their child's growth and development? Another question that I have related to that is that, a statement is, an informed, active, and engaging parent is an asset, even when parents are sharing information that we oftentimes may not want to hear, that could, be a concern or complaint. But, in the greater scheme of things, you want parents that are going to be active and vocal and engaged in your program, because it makes your program stronger and more effective. So I really encourage that. And one of the other questions that I have is that if your parents are not completing the family survey, and they also are not accessing the dispute resolution system, which is very common in Part C, how are you hearing from them? What other form of mechanisms do you have to hear from parents? Informal really doesn't work. We need something concrete and formal. So really, I think it's a legitimate question. If your parents are not completing the survey, if they're not accessing the dispute resolution, how do you know that they're satisfied with the services that you're providing? How do you know that these services are meeting the needs of their children? How do you know that their children are growing and developing? Engagement and support. How often is family survey discussed? Is it a one and done process? Is it several times throughout the year? ICC data share, I think I shared about that. Do you demonstrate how the data is tied to student achievement, performance, and outcomes with your parents? Do you share research with parents that discuss the relationship between parent involvement and parent achievement? There's lots out there. It's a fact. I'd like to share a few concepts with you on family engagement from Dr. Karen Mapp, a Harvard professor and expert on family engagement. And she just talks about the importance of meeting families where they are. Establishing intentional, meaningful, non-biased family engagement, policies and procedures. Respecting the diversity and differences of all families, regardless of how they show up at your door. It's important for every staff member, whether they work with families or not, to embody the message of intentional, meaningful and engaged family involvement. A program philosophy and structure that intentionally welcomes and supports parents and families. Next slide, please. And so this is actually the end of my presentation, except for the next slide, where it's just a reminder of the 2020 APR. But yeah, these are some concepts to consider as you continue to work on your family survey process from now until February 1, 2020. And we hope that equity is a big part of it, and diversity, engagement and support. As I said, meeting families where they are, linking the relationship between parent involvement and parents' rights, and welcoming parent input at every opportunity that you can, but particularly in the family survey process. And trust in relationships. Oftentimes when families feel a sense of inclusion and importance and can establish trusting relationships with the people who are in their children's lives most often more than they are, particularly before the pandemic. Children spend more time in schools and programs than they do with the parents sometimes. I know my daughter did when she was in daycare. So yeah, trust and establishing a relationship is a very, very important part of family engagement. So I hope that my presentation has given you some food for thought. And next slide, please. So these are just a reminder. You guys know the APR, the 2020 APR is due February 1, 2020. And there are some revisions that have happened. And these are just a reminder that please refer to your earlier emails, the IDA website, and your state lead for additional information on the 2020 APR process. So at this point, it is my absolute pleasure to pass the mic to Mr. Thomas McGee. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Very happy and excited to be here with you all today. I don't know if you remember, well, it's been a long time for me, but I was thinking about this presentation and I was thinking about Sesame Street. So I kind of wanted to start us off with a moment about Sesame Street. If you remember, they would have a word for today when you watch that particular episode. And so I thought I wanted to do a word for today as well. My word for us today is we. Why is that? Because I like to be inclusive. We are simply better together. We all here have and share the same goal. And when you say we are being representative. So today's word of the day is we. I can't see my PowerPoint. Should I be seeing my slides? There we go. My session is called Family Voices Matter, Improving Response Rates and Representativeness. I want to talk a minute about why family voices matter. It matters because when we hear feedback from our families as we're providing services, it allows us to tailor services to their specific and unique needs and respect their individuality. It also allows us to coach staff as we get feedback based on interactions that our staff are having with them. It allows us to look at quality and results versus just solely looking at compliance. And while doing all that, I personally think that that leads to better child outcomes in the long run. For example, I'm going to use an analogy. I can go to the store. Actually, I can order a suit or some piece of clothing online. And when I do so, I'm taking the gamble that it's going to fit like I want it to fit when I receive it. Or I could simply go down to the store or go down to the tailor and have a suit custom made to fit me exactly. And that is our goal with our families as service providers and service agencies. We want our interventions, we want our services, we want our policies and practices and procedures to be shaped around the feedback that we are receiving from families. If our data is not representative, then we're only getting an incomplete picture, meaning our data, our statewide data, or even our local data is not going to be accurate. We're only going to be getting a limited view. What happens in those scenarios potentially could create a disparity, because if group A is able to provide feedback about their experiences and we're able to take that feedback and incorporate it into our practices, but we never hear from group B, group A is getting a better, more enriched service than group B. So that's, again, why it's important to make sure that we're tailoring our services to the unique feedback that we're receiving from our families to help tweak our services, our practices, our policies, our laws, legislature, whatever we're talking about. So in the end, families, they know their rights. They're able to effectively communicate their needs. They're able to help their children learn and develop. And if our families can get to the point where they can do that, we have equipped that family with the tools needed to help them navigate these systems throughout their child's childhood, essentially. Next slide, please. Our journey today will include an overview of some barriers and potential pitfalls, some strategies for engaging stakeholders, I want to talk a little bit about disparity and equity. And last but not least, some items related to technical assistance. Next slide, please. Barriers and potential pitfalls. I'm not going to talk about this in great detail just due to time, but basically here I've lumped these into certain buckets, if you will. If we talk about technology, we're talking about families having access to technology or the skills to use technology. We have families who have, limited data plans or no access to Wi-Fi, and we have to kind of navigate and work around those particular barriers that may arise when we're working with families and soliciting feedback. Knowledge about even internet or things like that come into play. We have programmatic policy and procedural, structural type issues, whether we're talking about infrastructure, whether we're talking about agency structure, sometimes how the agency is structured or infrastructure issues can come up in terms of being able to deal with the capacity of what's going on. Human resources is an issue in terms of if you have a large amount of staff vacancies, policies and procedures fall in there where, you may be dealing with political issues, and politics in itself, especially these days, can be considered a barrier in and of itself if you're, beating your head up against the wall related to some political issues that might be going on in your local community or your state. Sometimes being too prescriptive can also be a barrier. We need to have flexibility built in to be able to deal with those unique needs and circumstances, and our policies must be able to bend but not break, so to speak. Just to name a few of those. Family engagement and satisfaction is another one. Frankly, lack of diversity can be a barrier. We have a lot of families who would like to be served by people who look like them, resemble them, live where they live, come from where they come from, are part of the same communities that they come from. And when I speak of diversity, think about race, think about ethnicity, think about gender, think about income, language, literacy level, geographical regions or certain communities, depending on where you are. I know, for example, where I live, the county is kind of divided up into many sections, and, a local may ask you where you're from. And if you're from Gilkey, that paints a certain picture in their mind in terms of where you're from. And it's almost kind of like being from a different state in terms of how you're viewed. So if you have people employed on your roster who knows those type of things, it may give them inroads in terms of establishing trust within a particular community or group of people to be able to begin to establish that rapport and things of that nature. So again, I'm not going to get too down in the weeds on that, but just wanted to mention that in terms of resources, caseload sizes matter, workloads. We all know there's been budget cuts and budget reductions for years, and that's something that social welfare agencies have had to deal with. And there are implications when that happened. There's more work being put on the remaining folks who are there, et cetera, et cetera. So again, some specific ones to families. Our families, sometimes are in situations where they're semi-homeless or homeless. They may stay with a grandmother or aunt today, and next week you may find them at a boyfriend's house or another friend's house or another family member's house. And so in terms of distribution of surveys and things like that, we really have to identify who the caregiver is, and we have to find a great way to make sure that that survey information reach the right hands, because oftentimes the person who the survey is mailed to or emailed to may not be the primary caregiver of that child. That child may have a grandmother or aunt or some other family member who is the primary caregiver. So again, staff turnover, there's competing interests in terms of, from an agency perspective, when you roll out new initiatives, there's the opportunity for more attention to be placed on that. And, you kind of lose focus of what you're doing over here with your family survey outcome activities and things of that nature. So again, I'm not going to try to spend too much time on that in the interest of time, but I did want to mention a few of those. And I also want to talk a little bit about some some strategies now. So if we could advance to the next slide. And basically, one strategy that I would recommend is utilizing your parent centers and partnering with them if you don't already. Look at establishing those collaborative relationships. Back when I was a local Part C director, we had a great relationship with our parent center who we used to provide facilitation for us for our family focus groups when we were revising our survey process and methodology and going through that whole period of time. And we use them in a variety of ways related to getting parent input on various projects and ideas that we had at the local and the state level. Building relationships is very important to not just check a box and not just have a person quote, as a stakeholder. You really need to spend time with them before meetings, after meetings, between meetings. After a meeting, have a debrief session with them. Make sure they're understanding the content that you want them to understand and what's going on. Make sure that you're talking to them ahead of the meeting. If the only time you talk to them is on the meeting day, I'm telling you now, you're probably not doing enough. You got to do more than that. So I hate using you because, again, today's word is we. And so you sounds like I'm preaching or blaming, and I sounds like I'm taking credit or responsible. So I got to keep telling myself today's word is we. In terms of I want to talk a little bit about seeking first to understand, hold focus groups with families to try to hear what's going on, to better understand what they're dealing with, so that you can get a better idea with families and stakeholders. Involve family, staff, and stakeholders in committee work. Build and foster those relationships by having frequent communication, whether that's by email, whether it's by sending out periodic updates. Just kind of keep that momentum going. Use surveys to solicit feedback, work further to understand the cultural, educational, and language barriers, and strive to include members of those groups in helping you to determine solutions. And then incorporate those findings into your action plan. Be intentional. What I mean by that is this work really doesn't happen on its own. It really takes an intentional focus. And focus on any area where your data has shown that there's dissatisfaction, whether that's on your end or on the family's end. I'm telling you that merely paying attention to this will reap positive change and results. Have dedicated positions at the local level, at the state level, because in the end, we're all well-intended. We come to these meetings and we hear good ideas, but the moment we get back, we have 80 emails, 15 voicemails and another conference to go to or a meeting to go to, and next thing you know, it's back in the rearview mirror again. This type of work cannot be oh yeah, I need to do this by this week because we're having this meeting kind of activity. It needs to be embedded into pretty much everything that's woven into your agency and your organization. So consider forming internal committees to begin the process of intentionally and systemically looking at your existing policies, procedures, practices to assess and address barriers and discrepancies in equity and representativeness. It should be viewed from the macro level, meaning dealing with your state legislatures and governors and whoever, all the way down to the micro level. So establish your subcommittees and bring in consultants as needed. Include those relevant parties in planning as need be. Embed your processes. Again, simply, I can't say it any plainer, just have this work as part of everything that your agency is involved in. IFSP meetings, open enrollment, QA, QI processes, monitoring visits with the service coordinators, annual visits, semi-annual visits, talk to your staff and your service coordinators about it in your supervisory meetings or group meetings that you're having, stakeholder and community related meetings and events, and then just work on having a family engagement activity and plan where you actually have a plan that you guys discuss periodically in terms of how you're doing in that area, and have some key metrics that you use to do that. I cannot stress that variety and flexibility are essential as well. It's important to employ a variety of methods in the distribution of survey and collection of results. That ranges from paper, email, direct links, phone, text, supervisor calls, family support calls from peers, anything of that nature, so that families have a variety of ways that, and they can pick the way that best suits them and their lifestyle and their needs for their family. I do want to mention one thing that I didn't mention that I feel like is a major in terms of a barrier, and that's the pandemic itself. The pandemic itself has families currently in situations that they've never been in before, and we have to be sensitive to that and find ways, innovative ways to meet their needs without stepping on their toes, so to speak. And as a family member, they have to worry about the tyranny of urgent, which means they may have a child who's extremely medically fragile with a lot of appointments, and we can't basically push our agenda down their throat. It has to be a joint process, and we can do it, but we have to do it in a way that's respectful to the family. I meant to mention that earlier, so I just wanted to say that. Provide prompts and reminders. It's important for staff to receive prompts, to provide prompts, have periodic ways that prompts are built into your system in terms of however you're distributing your surveys to families. Again, related activities should be embedded within all processes. Help families understand the significance of their feedback, that they're actually providing feedback that's going to help them get better services. And if they're about to exit from the program, it's going to help these other families get better services. And just really let them know how much their feedback is valued, and that we see them as the experts of their children, and we need to take their viewpoints into mind. Share your results widely and timely. I say this because I know back before we made any changes, when I was back in the local program, the way our system, it was just the nature of our system. By the time we received feedback, it was almost, I don't want to say useless, but it wasn't in real time. So it was hard to really make corrective actions or do a lot. You could do it, but you were so far behind the point at that time, it just didn't really reinforce the behaviors that we wanted. So it was nice to be able to revamp our process and get it to the point where that was no longer the case. So just share results timely, especially with your stakeholders. That helps keep them engaged too, if they can see how their input and decisions are helping to lead programmatic, systematic change. And most importantly, celebrate those successes, please. I mentioned lack of diversity. Again, that's a strategy. How can you improve your diversity amongst your organization so that you have a welcoming culture for those folks who need your services? I can tell you that a lack of a diverse workplace will impact your ability to have a diverse customer client base. So that could be an issue for you right now. Diversity must exist at each level of your agency and infrastructure. We can't keep doing the same things. We have to, and expecting a different results. We have to do new things. With that said, we have to look at alternative methods. And are there alternative methods to supplementing our survey data, whether that's focus group or supervisory calls or quality assurance calls or something along those lines? How can we think outside the box to take care of some of those issues? I wanted to provide, let me see where I am. 1 second. You can advance the slide for me, please. And you can advance that one as well. Okay, thank you. I wanted to talk just briefly about how data from families should be used. And I'm not going to say a whole lot here. I think it speaks for itself, but basically it should be shared. It should be used to determine trends, to review policies and practices for programmatic improvement, and to provide feedback to providers and state and office stakeholders. Next slide. This slide I just put in there just as a placeholder because I didn't want to forget this. I wanted to make sure I said. Be aware of implementation dip after you make any changes. It's natural to see some progression and regression. So take that take that with a grain of salt and be okay with that if need be. And you'll slowly make your way to representativeness. Next slide, please. So again, as next steps, after you've looked at your data, further examine disparities, look at the impact of social policies, revise methodology as needed, be flexible, using a lot of variety of ways, and be change agents. And on this one, I just want to touch on this really briefly. I could also say be a pioneer. And what I mean by that is sometimes we can't hide behind policy or law. We have to do what's right. And sometimes laws need to be changed and systems need to be dismantled so that we can move forward. Miles Davis once said, if anybody wants to keep creating, they have to be about change. Next slide. Disparity. I know my time's getting short, so I'm trying to hurry up and wrap up. I wanted to just mention disparity. Disparity is a lack of equality or similarity, especially in a way that is not fair. Disparity is experienced by one group relative to another due to differences in resources and outcomes with the following categories. So I just wanted to give a visual of the following categories that are there. Next slide, please. Also, there's some confusion about equal versus equitable. Equal presumes the same starting point. Equity is when everybody has the same opportunity to reach their full potential and are no more likely to encounter burdens or benefits because of their identity. Next slide. This is just one of my favorite slides, and I included it because, as you can see in the first image, it is assumed that everybody will benefit from the supports. They are being treated equally. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. They are being treated equitably. In the third image, all three can see the game without any supports accommodations because the cause of the inequity will be addressed. The systemic barrier was removed. Based upon all of us on this call being being a representative of a social welfare institution and the nature of our roles, we all play a part in addressing inequities, and working to identify and remove systemic barriers should be our cause and our goal. Next slide. Just briefly, I just wanted to mention that we do provide TA services, individual services, which we triage and determine how those should be taken care of. And I just wanted to highlight really quickly that we have, just highlight a couple of examples of some of the groups that we have. We have a families equity cohort where we have states who meet regularly with us in a group session where we talk about issues and look at common themes. And then in between sessions, they have individual TA members who are assigned to them that work with them. And then we also have a family outcomes community of practice group where we bring states together and talk about family survey outcome related issues related to equity or other common themes. So I'm running out of time. As I always do, I try to pack a lot into my presentations. So that just talks about the purposes of the equity cohort, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move us on. These slides were just taken to show some examples of the type of questions that we talked about in those groups. What activities to improve representativeness and equity did your state develop as part of your action plan? What questions do you have for other states, and what are you still pondering? Next slide, please. Here again are just some examples of the types of things that we're focused on: providing effective strategies, peer-to-peer learning, share available tools, resources, help staff to better understand the requirements. Next slide, please. Again, what are states doing well? How can states prepare for new requirements? And how could community of practice provide support? Next slide, please. Now I'm coming to the end of my presentation. And again, for time, I'm trying to cut through and finish. I wanted to tell a really quick story to kind of give a concrete example of what I'm talking about. There was a middle school in North Carolina that during COVID was going to be having basketball tryouts. And a decision was made by the administration that due to, I'm assuming it was due to resources, that students would have to leave the school, go home, and return back for tryouts. As a result of that decision, what happened, there were no children of color who showed up for the basketball tryout. The basketball coach, realizing this was an issue, went to the administration and basically told them, you know, what had happened. And they talked about it and decided to allow those students to have tryouts at a later date. And I just think that's a good example and overview of how, if you don't have the right people around the table when decisions are made, you end up in situations where you don't have the best point of view and you don't have the right people to make the right decision, and somebody gets left out. And again, I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap up with that visual and say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn, who will be talking about our parent centers. And I do want to say, as I hand it over to her, stakeholder engagement is very important going forward. And as a TA center, we're going to be working to develop products. And we have certain activities that are going on right now where we're partnering with parent centers to look at stakeholder engagement and learning modules and things of that nature that will be available for a trainer session, and to begin to get parents feeling more comfortable sitting in meetings such as related to ICC or SPP or APR, where they would help make state performance plan or APR related decisions with their counterparts. And with that, I'm done. Turning it over to Carolyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing. I am going to hold the word of the day with me for the rest of the day. And I appreciate all of the information that you shared with us. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hayer, and I am the director of the Center for Parent Information and Resources. And I'm glad to be here with you today, and I would like to invite you to utilize the chat if you have questions or comments that you want to share, because I'm going to be moving pretty quickly so that we can finish on time. Next slide, please. I have 4 things that I'd like to focus on with you today. Hopefully helping you to get to know the Parent Center Network a little bit better. So I'll share some information about our network. We'll talk a little bit about stakeholder engagement and certainly the importance of representation, because representation does matter. And I appreciate all the wisdom that Thomas and Jennifer shared about that so far today. I want to talk a little bit about data and the use of data and how the Parent Center Network is working with families to prepare them to be active participants at the table in using data and to be data leaders. And last but not least, I would like to share some tools that you may be able to use in your work, and to share some strategies that I hope will be helpful to you. Next slide, please. So just a quick synopsis of the Parent Center Network, who we are, what we do. Our primary focus is providing direct services for children engaged with disabilities, their families, and the professionals and other organizations that support them. If you don't know, I wanted to tell you that there are nearly 100 Parent Center and Information Centers, and also known as PTIs, and also Community Parent Resource Centers, known as CPRCs, across the United States and the territories. Our primary activities are working with infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families, for those children birth to age 26, and supporting their families as well. We really focus on helping parents to effectively participate in their child's education and ensuring that they have access to the services and supports that they need for healthy development, and to partnering with professionals and policymakers to work towards improving outcomes for all children with disabilities. Next slide, please. So the SIPR, as we are lovingly known, we are the Center for Parent Information and Resources. Our focus is to respond to the needs and support the missions of parent centers across the country. We are a central hub of information, and we work to create products for parent centers across the network to ensure that the families, that they are able to serve families. All of the materials that are found on the SIPR Hub, parentcenterhub.org is our website address, have been created and are archived for parent centers to help them provide the support for families. And I wanted to let you know that the SIPR really employs a what we call a user-centered process, right? We gather the perspective from parent center staff and parent center professionals who are our primary audience. We use their input as we try to develop resources that are useful for them. They are involved at every step of the process along the way as we create products and services that will increase the knowledge and the capacity of parent centers across the country. I think you all will have access to this PowerPoint, and embedded are links to some of the resources that are available on the Parent Center Hub, such as our resource library, our Buzz from the Hub, which is our bi-monthly newsletter, and you will find a place to sign up for that if you're interested. And there's a wonderful index of resources in Spanish, and there's an index for English speakers so that you can identify resources that would be useful for the Spanish-speaking families that you may be working with. There's some key information about school reopening. One of the things that we did was to take the handbooks that were developed by OSEP and to create some infographics to kind of summarize all of that information into a one-pager to help families to be able to access that information, and so that they can be authentically engaged and participate in the school reopening process at the local level, and to ensure that they understand what's happening, what's required, and what the expectations are. You will see a link on the slide for how you can access those resources and many others. And I also did want to quickly mention a new resource that we have. It's a series of videos that focus on supporting students with the most intensive needs. And I would invite you to take a look at that whenever you can. Next slide, please. So this is a map that I wanted to share with you. The SIPR works very closely with the 4 regional PTACs, the Parent Technical Assistance Centers, who are charged with providing technical assistance to all of the parent centers across the country. The country is divided up into 4 regions, and you can see here by color what the 4 regions are and the states that are included in each of the regions. The technical assistance that is provided to the parent centers from the RPTACs can range anywhere from providing individual consultations, ongoing training and webinars. We help them to focus on building the capacity of their parent center, knowing that strong parent centers will ensure that we can continue to provide services for the families that are in need. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share a little bit with you some of the data from the parent centers, what we've been calling parent centers in action. This is the 2019-2020 data. And we are proud to share this with you. The fact that we, as the Parent Center Network, were able to communicate with and stay in contact with over 1.8 million parents, students, teachers, and family members, and other professionals in the field, even in the midst of the pandemic. And I just have to tell you that parent centers were able to really kind of turn on a dime and shift how they deliver services, to learn virtual platforms and all of the things that we've all had to do in the midst of the pandemic. And even though we've been challenged to do that, we've actually seen an increase in the number of families that we have provided training to, and to providing individual assistance to. And so we welcome states, professionals, educators in the field to reach out and connect with your parent center. There's a link on our website, and it's shown here at the bottom of the slide, on how you can find your parent center. You just click on that link, you find your state, and you'll find contact information for your parent center there. Next slide, please. So today I just wanted to speak with you a little bit about engaging stakeholders. I know that you all have been very focused on this, but we believe that the SPP APR process is an excellent opportunity for states and for families to work together. It's important that we not focus only on the one indicator that looks at family engagement, but to really work together across all indicators. We just want to say how critically important it is to value the family voice and what families bring to the table. And we hope to be able to, today I hope to share some strategies on how you can connect with families, but the perfect starting place is to reach out to your parent center. They will also share with you not just ways to reach families, but they can share some of the culturally responsive practices that we use to make sure that we're reaching underserved families and connecting with them, providing them with services. Next slide, please. So I don't want to just read the slide, but I just want to say over and over and over, representation matters. I can't say that enough. And so that's the point of this graphic. Parent centers and the families that they serve are really key stakeholders in ensuring positive, successful outcomes for students and for families. And although indicator 8 is looking at measuring parental involvement specifically, if we really want to improve student outcomes, we have to recognize the importance of parent engagement and partnership across all of the indicators. The value of the family voice cannot be overstated, especially now when families have, due to the pandemic, have really been more intricately involved with their students' educational services and needs and programming than they ever have been before. And so it is up to us to also identify multiple ways that we can connect with families and all families, and be thinking actively about reaching all families, particularly those from underserved communities and those whose children may have the poorest outcomes. We have to work extra hard to ensure that we go that extra mile to reach those families. It's important that we use culturally responsive practices in our work so that we can be respectful of, and even more importantly, responsive to what families tell us. And oftentimes we will reach out and engage families for their input, but we may not necessarily honor their ideas or what they share with us, particularly if their views are different than our own. So I think it's critical that we make sure that we are proactive in doing that. And I'd like to now share with you some tools that can assist in this work. So we can move to the next slide. So here's some questions that I hope you can ask What should states are working with parent centers? What can you do around parent involvement activities? Parent centers really have significant contributions to make. And I hope you can appreciate what they can bring to the table in terms of leading meaningful change at the state and local level. I've already shared with you a link on how to access your parent center if you don't already know how. Next slide, please. And I just want to quickly share with you, I won't read the slide. We all know the importance of data. The Parent Center Network has been working really closely with families to ensure that they understand data, that they are becoming data leaders. Thomas mentioned one of the projects that they're working on, that we're working on with Daisy. But the idea is parent centers are a great place for you to reach out if you are looking for stakeholders to be engaged in your work. They can provide additional support to the families as well as to the states in terms of reaching families and effectively engaging with families. And on the next slide, I will just show you some tools. I want to talk a little bit about some tools or strategies you can use for success. Making sure you're inviting families to the table. Parent centers can help you identify those families. We heard earlier today the importance of meeting families where they are, and not making it a one and done, and not just reaching out for that annual, target setting meeting, but really maintaining ongoing relationships with families so that we can really have authentic engagement and not just the one and done and checking off that box. Next slide, please. There's a platform called Serving on Groups that parent centers have all been trained on using. The Serving on Groups, we have trained some states in using this as a mechanism for ensuring that you can effectively engage with families. There's a whole section on data, but it's not just about the data. It is how do you set meetings and plan purposefully to ensure that the family voice is heard, is brought to the table and heard. And how do you provide leadership opportunities for families? How do you ensure that families are part of the decision-making process? There's a link at the bottom of the slide that talks about Serving on Groups. I invite you to go there. Next slide, please. And then within the Serving on Groups, we also have another platform called Leading by Convening, where we talk about ways to bring people and organizations together so that we can support improving child and family outcomes. It's really about how do we create sustainable systems change. And to do that, it really is important that we include authentic family voices and ensure that we have a diversity of stakeholders at the table as we're having these conversations. And by doing that, we change the dynamic from us versus them to us versus whatever the problem or the issue is. And so that's some of the ways by using the Leading by Convening tools that we can ensure that we are moving forward towards having the positive outcomes that we're seeking. Next slide, please. Okay, I tried to do that as quickly as I could because I'm usually standing between someone and lunch, but maybe it's someone and dinner. So I hope you've been posting questions into the chat. And in closing, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I thank my colleagues for posting links into the chat. I hope I didn't go too quickly, but I invite you to reach out to the SIPR, to your parent center. We are here. We're looking forward to have the opportunity to connect with you and to work with you and to support you. And I know there are some resources to be shared, so that is coming up. And I will turn this back over to Jennifer for closing. I think.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you so much, Thomas. We apologize for running a few minutes over. Yes, there should be one slide. I think Swati has been adding resources that we've been talking, but we can also get it to you via email. Yes, this is a combined network of resources that Thomas, Carolyn, and I came up with, and that we hope that you'll be able to, use at your convenience and make really good use of these excellent resources. And with that, I think that it's time to say goodbye, and thank you everyone for being a part of our presentation today, and keep up the good work and reach out to us anytime you need to. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.